Then he asked me the same question a third time. And when God asks you a question 3 times, it's usually after something more than a great theological answer. And he said, Jason, why haven't you asked me for victory? And I could barely get the words out. I said, Lord, if I ask you for victory and we lose, my heart will be broken. I don't want to have a broken heart. And he says back to me, he says, Jason, would you trust me with your broken heart? I just wept. I didn't know what to do with that. I was like, yes, Lord, of course, I will trust you with my broken heart.
Welcome back to the Attorneys on Accident podcast with your hosts, Joe Wirth and Ash Blackburn. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We are sitting down with Jason Guinasso. He is, I'm just going to give it away. He is the quintessential attorney on accident on the Attorneys on Accident podcast. Jason thought he was going to be a pastor, wanted to be a pastor. He's become this attorney who's got the biggest heart. He can talk Ash into trying cases that, she's too busy to go to trial on because he's got such a big heart. But Jason has recently written a book called Lawyering with Faith, and we're going to hear all about that. We're going to kind of find out, what led to that book, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to talk a lot about God today. We're going to talk a lot about this concept of, can you have a career that's inherently riddled with conflict and still come out clean? But more than that, can you start to change the way that some of these professions where they're, you're just constantly fighting, or they're hurting your soul, can they coexist, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what your book is all about. And I think it's timely. I think it's profound. And I'm really excited for this conversation. So let's kick it off. Jason Guinasso, tell us your story.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. And, I look forward to the opportunity to just kind of share my heart and some of the experiences I've had, living this life and working in the practice of law, as a person who both loves the law, but also loves people and loves God with my whole heart, and wants to love and serve people well. In that regard. And so
and I have to jump in and say, you're the second guest that Ash and I have had on where it was a good friend. His name is Ahmad, and he's a Muslim, and I just told Ash we have to have him come on because I witnessed how when he went from prison to faith and was just so open about it and didn't hide it, how it's just attracts everybody to him. And I was fascinated from afar going, what is going on here? And so we might be teasing out a little bit of a theme
Jason's
here.
my Ahmad. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, you'd certainly wear it on your sleeve.
Yeah. And just with the idea of, I'm not here to push my faith on anybody, but I want to be authentic to who I am. So what does it mean to be truly authentic to who I am and all the aspects of who I am, physically, spiritually, professionally? And my book really wrestles with this question of how do we live fully integrated, complete lives where the God we profess to love and serve and have faith in is intricately a part of the day-to-day decisions we make and the work that we do and the decisions that we make and the mistakes we make and the victories we have and all of those things. What does having authentic faith fully integrated in life look like? And so that's a big part of my story. And
and you're going to dismiss this whole nonsense about work-life balance and this what we're all kind of searching for but struggling to find, which I think is, can they coexist? Can I live with purpose, live with meaning, still make a living, but not have them constantly be bumping into each other, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we don't want to see, our work and life, whatever we are defining as life, be in conflict with one another. What we want to see is our work and our life complement each other, because work is life, and work is more a part of our life than any other aspect of our life. And so what we do at work and how it forms and shapes us and how we form and shape it, how it complements what we are in other aspects of our life, whether we're spouses to other people, whether we're parents, whether we have, communities of friends. How does what we do in our work show up in, our interpersonal relationships in our community? And then how does our faith inform all of those things, So pulling all that together and not compartmentalizing. As attorneys, we're really good at compartmentalizing things, putting this in its box, putting this other thing in its other box. I just don't think that's a healthy way to live life, because it robs us of flourishing, being able to fully flourish in all that we are in all aspects of our life.
Why does it do that?
Well, because it's like taking a plant and cutting it into multiple pieces and, taking the root system and putting it, in the bathroom of your house, taking the branches. What's going to happen? You disembody the plant, the plant will die.
And expect it to grow and yield fruit.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not going to yield fruit. It's not going to survive more than a week. The roots may bear something later, but certainly the branches and anything else connected to that was connected to that root system. So we don't take living organisms and cut those living organisms into multiple parts and say that's healthy for that organism.
Yet we do it in our work life.
We do it to our
work-life balance.
Yeah, we do it to our humanity. We cut ourselves into pieces. And we show up in this place here.
As this person.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Okay. And it's death. I mean, I think that's death. And I think the thing that leaves us empty when we live lives that are compartmentalized is, an emptiness and an unfulfilledness and this idea that we're missing out on something. And
something else out there.
And I think that comes back to like the big questions in life. Who are we? Why are we? What's our why? And where are we? Like physically, where are we? And how do those three things work together? How do the answers to those questions work together then to put us in the place we're supposed to be at the time we're supposed to be there in the place that we're supposed to be, as we're, considering our purpose and considering what makes us fulfilled and considering what makes us happy, and also what is valuable enough to suffer for, what is valuable enough to sacrifice for, what is valuable enough to have a broken heart for. So those are some of the things I hope we get into today as we engage in this conversation, and that's a big part of what my book's about. So
wonderful. Yeah. We're excited to get into it.
Yeah, sure. And this is the case that kind of brought together and then gave birth to the idea of this book. Was there's a call I got, and Friday like at 5, and a couple out of Fernley, and one was a priest out there, and his wife, and they had brought 7 kids to Nevada from Costa Rica and raised most of them. And their oldest one that they raised, her name was Alyssa, and she had eloped from her group home. She had about the mentality of a, 5th grader. She had been horribly sexually abused in her place of origin. And, but so she would escape, go to the casinos, play the casinos, and then from time to time, men at these truck stops and stuff would take advantage of her. So in one of those instances, she was pregnant, and it was discovered she was pregnant through her neurologist who was treating her epilepsy. And he freaked out because he'd been giving her medication for epilepsy that could compromise the pregnancy. So he called his friend who was a judge, and that judge brought the family into court and said, your daughter's pregnant. What are you going to do about it? And they said, well, we're going to help her have the baby. And he said, well, that's not going to happen. She's got to have an abortion. And so they called me and said, we don't want our daughter to have an abortion. We don't think she wants to have an abortion either, but the court's going to force her to have an abortion. Will you help us? And I heard this story and I thought, that's impossible. I've never heard of a judge forcing a person to have an abortion. That doesn't happen, right? And so so as I was, I come to court and the judge is saying, welcome, Mr. Guinasso, and who are you representing? And that was kind of an odd question because the parents were legal guardians of their adult child who was in a group home, and the guardians had certain responsibilities under the law, including reporting to the court and things like that. So court was raising questions about those issues, and then said, we've just learned that she's pregnant, and we want to use something called the substituted judgment doctrine, a doctrine out of Massachusetts, to determine whether this young lady should have an abortion or not. I'm like, substituted judgment doctrine. Okay. And then he said, and we're gonna adjudicate this with you representing the guardians, and I'm gonna appoint a guardian ad litem. I'm gonna have the county child protective service, or not child protective. Yeah, they were like child protective services. I forget which division though. The county, and then a lawyer from the state. So essentially, I had 3 attorneys arguing that abortion was appropriate under these circumstances, even if it was against this woman's desire, because they didn't think she had the mental capacity to make that decision. Mm-hmm. So in any event, he sets this up, and then at this hearing, he has an expert already lined up. A guy by the name of Dr. Schlotnick. Have you dealt with that? Mm-hmm. Doctor? Yeah. So he's like a neonatologist, I think is what they called him. And he gave like 2 hours of testimony without any cross-exam. I didn't get it. He just judges questioning him, and all these attorneys get to question him. And he concludes his testimony by saying, the only compassionate thing to do in these circumstances from a biomedical standpoint is to abort this fetus and tie this woman's tubes. and then that was the end of his testimony, and it's like 5:15. The judge is like, okay, we have to conclude court. Well, judge, I need to cross-examine this. We can't just leave it there. Judge, he's got to go. You can call him later, and that's the end of the day. And then he says, for the next 6 weeks, we're going to have hearings 2-3 times a week to deal with this question. And I said, okay. And that was my first day at court in this situation, and this family is just devastated. And so I told the family, I said, listen, I don't know what kind of legal skill I have to change kind of the disposition of the court, but I would invite you to pray with me, because I know, the Bible talks about God holding kind of the hearts of decision makers in his hand, and he kind of directs them like a river. And so what would that look like in this situation if we were to pray and see what God might do, what he might reveal in 6 weeks of hearings? And really what happened is my whole legal practice was put on hold. I was able to bill clients, and I was hijacked by this case. It became kind of a nationally known and internationally. China was reporting on a judge in the United States who was going to force a young woman to have an abortion. It kind of turned the whole abortion debate on its head, because it was, normally it's, the woman gets to choose, and, government stay out. But in this situation, I'm saying, the woman is choosing, and the woman and her family are choosing to have the baby, but the government, in the form of the court, is working to, and I was like, how's that going to work, like practically? Right. We're going to like strap her to the table. But in any event, we bring experts in from all over the country, and this is all pro bono, so it's not like generating. And I've got a small staff. Kim and I just opened our solo practice. And so we engage in this, and we developed a strong relationship with this family and with the greater community, and we just continue to present, evidence and testimony. And then when we get to this seminal moment where I finally get to examine the neurologist who brought this whole thing to the court, not the neonatologist, but the neurologist who was treating her for epilepsy, who was adamant she needed to have an abortion because this epileptic condition made the pregnancy risky, and therefore it should be terminated. And so I just kind of, I don't know everything anyway. Like I like to say I play like I'm Columbo and don't know anything, but I really don't know like everything about anything, especially medicine. And so when I approach doctors and I'm examining them, even now, I just take the approach that they know more about medicine than I do. So let's kind of talk about what you know. Tell me all the things you know about your profession and how it applies to these facts. And then let me ask you some follow-up questions just based on what you know. And so they love to talk. Most doctors love to talk about what they know. And so they spend half a day talking about all the things they know. I took really copious notes, but then when I applied all the things he said he knew to this situation, at the end, he had to admit that abortion was not clinically indicated in these circumstances based on all the things he told me were clinical indications of when a person should get an abortion. So in any event, judge was like had his hand over his head because he saw the train coming, as it was leaving the station about to hit his key expert. And in any event, judge calls us all back to his chambers. All the attorneys that he appointed are sitting over there and the state representatives and then me. He says, doesn't appear that abortion's on the table anymore. We're getting at a juncture in she's like at her 24th week by this time that, either this is going to happen or not. Anybody disagree with that? Nobody disagrees. So he turns to me and says, okay, Mr. Guinasso, what are we going to do? So I said, well, the family wants to help this young woman have her baby to term, and there are a number of adoptive families that are available. But I think the family, the mom and dad who had adopted her originally want to adopt her daughter so that they can maintain the relationship. And so baby's born, beautiful, 6-pound, 8-ounce little one. And the same judge that was contemplating aborting this one a year after she was born presided over her adoption.
Really?
Yeah. And it was a big...
Can't write this stuff.
It's just crazy. And so, but for me, all of the things I'd been wrestling with God over, when it came to faith and when it came to how does my relationship with him and my desire to love and serve people well, how does that fit in the legal profession? And this case kind of opened my eyes and helped me see that there is a way to fully integrate all of who we are, the parts of us that are reserved only for, the living God, the parts of us that are given to vocation, the parts of us that are made to serve one another, and how do we bring all that together? And the book really, since that time, I've been contemplating, how do I articulate this in a message? And so over the years, I've had, hundreds of experiences and other things that have helped inform what lawyering by faith looks like, how lawyering with a relationship with Jesus Christ, what does that look like in legal practice, because that's my context. And I think in the book, I use being a lawyer as kind of an avatar. Like you could substitute being an accountant, you could substitute being a doctor. You could substitute being any professional you want.
By faith.
Yeah, by faith. And it would work. You just have to, understand that, doctors, accountants, teachers, people that are working in life, it might look a little bit different for them in their context than it does for me. But the principles, the God we're dealing with is the same. And his desire to show up in our work is the same. And that's a neat revelation, I think, to know that not only has God given us work to do and it's good, but that he's excited and for that work and he's interested in that work that we're doing, whatever the work is, right? And so...
Bank robber by faith?
Bank robber by faith.
Maybe not
bank robber. Anything where we're not...
test you now.
We're not breaking the law.
Not for every profession.
Maybe not for every profession, but for, the professions that, where we're...
in service.
But we're in service or we're producing something for society.
Of value.
Of value. Yeah, for sure. Can there be bartenders by faith? I think so. Serving alcohol in our society is legal and appropriate and,
responsible way.
And responsible. And I think, there are bartenders that do a really good job of loving and caring for people. Cannabis operators. That's a hard one for me. I don't have the perspective that would allow me to go that far, but I know that I've met a lot of people in the cannabis industry that have a genuine care and concern for people and their health and well-being.
Right, mental health.
And, want to do that for a lot of compelling reasons. And so I leave space, even though I disagree with that industry and what I think it does to people, I leave space for relationships with people where that could be possible.
Or if you didn't, I think you'd be going against your very message, right?
Yeah.
That Christ was not about excluding. He was, hey, if you like what I have to say, follow me. And but otherwise everyone's got to find their own spiritual path.
Yeah, for sure. And that doesn't mean that, like, politically, I if I ran a statewide campaign to oppose legalization of marijuana, and I my convictions on that are well documented in many places, and so you can have firm convictions about what you believe and why you believe it without destroying relationship, with people that have diametrically opposed views from you. And I don't think it makes what I believe less potent. I don't think it compromises who I think I am. I think if we leave room for those kinds of relationship, I think it expands us. It makes us.
Well, it's inviting.
Yeah.
Well, it's such an important message in our culture right now. So my biggest question to you is, how do you do it? I always look at you as an enigma of people, because how do you do it? How do you have convictions as strongly as you do, but leave so much room for people to disagree with you on that very message?
Yeah, I think the answer to that question maybe comes through the concept of humility. Like, what does it mean to be humble? What does it mean to? Because it's an attribute of who I know God to be through Christ, right? And so, how do I bear the fruit of humility in how I see God and myself, how I see me and my family, those who immediately are, in my sphere of influence, those who I work with, and then those in the community. And when we're talking about like highly charged political issues, for example, I think humility in a situation where, we've got Democrats, Republicans, we've got people who love President Trump and people who despise him. I think humility says, I don't have all the information. I don't have all the answers, but I do have a conviction that I think I want to share to contribute to the conversation.
Right.
And being courageous and fearless enough to share that conviction, but being humble enough to allow people to criticize and to push back on that, and to know that if people push back, and maybe I'm wrong about one thing or another, and at the end of my days, I may find that half of the positions I took in life were somehow wrong or misinformed.
Extreme.
Yeah, one way or the other. But I don't think that gives us license to just say, well, everything is relative, therefore we're not going to believe anything or have any convictions about anything. Because then, what does that do to our humanity? What does that do to our dignity when we take that approach? It really makes our humanity and dignity subjective. That is, contingent on what other people think. And I think for you and I, and for those who might be listening in on our conversation, I think part of maintaining human dignity is having a clear sense of who you are and why you are and where you are, right? So all those big questions. And so if there's some aspect of your life where, whether it's how you serve the community, how you serve in your law firm or your place of work, or how you serve in your family, and there's conflict that's arising and there's a lack of peace, then a lot of times it arises from some wrestling with who you are, what your why is, and where you are in life, either geographically or kind of metaphysically. And so if you're struggling with those areas, like your relationship with your significant other is going to be strained, right? Why? Because there's this internal turmoil. And once you resolve that turmoil, then you have more space to show grace to what this other human being who's sharing life with you. And so in marriage, for those of us who've been married for, you're just engaged, right?
Yeah.
Congratulations
Thank
to you. Yeah, and then you've been married for
24
years. Yeah, so I'm my 31st year of marriage. And, they're two opposite human beings growing, learning what it means to love another human being, knowing what it means to grow a family. And in that process, they're there are peaks and valleys, and it's in those valleys where we have to extend each other, grace. And if we use that as a metaphor for how we want to engage, people in the workplace, how we want to engage,
right,
our community, then we're not treating our relationships and our communities as expendable, because I think that's a failing of our current culture.
Transactional.
It's very transactional. Yeah, that's a very good word for that. Transactional, where we're
what am I getting out of this?
Yeah, what am I going to get out of this? If
I don't, then I'm not going to stop and talk to that person or let them talk when I'm in a hurry and give them maybe a couple minutes that they really need to just like have that, where your life is full and all you can think about is how do I get out of this conversation? Yes. I'm projecting a little.
I see.
Yeah. And then, it comes down to like the holy trinity of our day is me, myself, and I. If this thing that I'm doing or part of doesn't serve my happiness, then I'm out, right? And we're not willing to suffer with one another. We're not willing to be a little bit unhappy to facilitate community. Because sometimes
well, let me pause you there. Say that again. We're not willing to be unhappy to facilitate community?
Yes, to facilitate community, yeah.
Well, we go a little deeper on that.
Yeah, I just think that whenever you're in a community and there is a diversity of needs and thoughts and ideas and ideology and upbringing and experience, that necessarily there has to be a sacrifice of some of what would make me happy, in living and operating and working in the community. It doesn't mean that I walk around, perpetually unhappy, because there's a give and take in community. If all of us are participating in community, knowing we have to sacrifice for one another, but knowing that sacrifice leads to our collective good and happiness, then I think those sacrifices that we make don't feel as burdensome, I think, ways Christian scriptures put this as, the concept of what do we do to take up our cross, and what does that taking up of our cross look like in the context of facilitating community, and how do we do that? How do we suffer well? And then how do we celebrate well when that suffering results in the benefit of other people, and when it results in the benefit of a community of people whom you interact with on a regular basis? And again, when I say community, I'm thinking first and foremost family. Secondly, the people we work with on a day-to-day basis. Thirdly, those maybe we go to church with. And then beyond that, the greater community that we participate in. So for me, my home is in Reno, and so I extend myself to my family, to my workplace, both in Reno here in Vegas, and then to my church and those I've been given to serve there, and then the greater community as I have opportunity. And I try to apply the humility, the grace, the sacrifice that I'm talking to you about in all of those areas in very practical, real ways. I'm not trying to advocate a gospel that's Pollyanna or disembodied from reality. I'm trying to connect what I know is true, right, and beautiful to the everyday experiences we have, and be brave enough to say it's okay. Because you'll get 1,000 people telling you it's not okay.
But people we've ascribed you as, we do it in a loving, teasing way, but what's the character that we...
Ted Lasso.
Oh, Ted Lasso. I love that.
Ash. Yeah, so Ash, as she got to know you, she's like, you're like a living embodiment of this Ted Lasso character who, by all means...
Eternally optimistic.
Yeah, what else?
Gives grace to all people, kill him with kindness. I think I tried to make a funny joke about somebody, and that was the first thing that you said back to me in a text message. Kill him with kindness. Instantly. It stopped me in my tracks.
And you've got all these, British soccer players looking at Jason Guinasso going like, is this guy for real? But I think unwittingly what you just did there, it's profound. It is, because I think you laid out the recipe to answer so much of the divisiveness and what everybody's kind of feeling and aware, and kind of is this common theme. Every time we sit down with a guest, it's hard for at some point to avoid this, like, it's a problem right now. It's divisive. It continues to get more and more polarized. So that's worth re-listening. Maybe slow down the audio, and just because I think you did a great job, like, to just give the recipe of like, hey, if you can have humility and approach, your work life the same way that you do with a relationship you really care about, and the strangers that you run into at CVS, like, that's the recipe, right?
Yeah, I think so. I do. And the way we deal, we live in a space, as attorneys, we live in a space where there's perpetual conflict. And so how do we bring humility into that when we've got an opposing counsel who's trying to do bad things to the people that we care about, the clients that we've been given to love and serve, and they're abusive to our staff, those sorts of things. So how do we rise above that? What do we do?
How do you rise above
Wrestle with that.
Yeah.
And we wrestle with that. We just had these conversations this week, Ash and I do, where the older and hopefully wiser that we've gotten, the less we want to participate in this manufactured fight and misrepresentations, and that's just the way the game is. And so, like, you either play the game or you lose the game, and it's like we're struggling with this idea. And it sounds like your book is trying to address this very problem of, like, do we have to stop being attorneys? Do we have to quit the profession to find peace?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think we do. I think we can be vigorous and even ferocious advocates for our clients and for the causes that we care about without dehumanizing. I think what happens is when we get into this space and we go to war with opposing views or opposing parties, we either wittingly or unwittingly dehumanize the other side, the defense counsel, the corporation.
Well, I think you have to be able to act that way, right? Otherwise, you would just be, I feel like you have to tell yourself that lie to step into that person that can go, well, yeah, because if they're human, you wouldn't treat them that way.
Yeah, exactly. And so what I've tried to do as a discipline, I don't think I've always been successful at this. The judges that I appear in front of would have to be the final arbiter of that, but because they get to see all the behaviors, good, bad, and indifferent. But what I try to do is not buy into that lie. Remember that every lawyer coming into the practice of law, representing whatever interests that they are, that first and foremost, they're human beings. They're professionals, trying to make a living. They probably have families and probably have a story. Sometimes I try to learn about that story. Like every trial I've ever been in, I've always become good friends with the opposing counsel by the end in some way, shape, or form. And that doesn't mean we're not fighting like crazy, in terms of like over rules of evidence, over what gets in, what gets out, how far they can go with questioning, all those sorts of things. We can be ferocious in that space, but be ferocious without then also taking it to the next level to dehumanize or to attack the dignity of other human beings in the space. And even when somebody is fraudulent, a liar.
Or I have to push back.
Yeah.
I agree with you that I could do this job if we were just arguing about the case, the facts, because I can appreciate that you have a perspective, that I have a perspective, and that the jury's going to have a perspective. And that's what's beautiful about the legal system, right? Is that we do collect people from the streets to come in and to decide with all of their perspectives what the truth is, right?
Yeah.
And that the truth is not all on my side and it's not all on their side.
Yeah.
But it's when attorneys on the other side break the rules and they try to cheat and they are abusive to staff and they do besmirch my client's name and call them a liar, that I can't help but dehumanize them.
Yeah. No, it's human, but I think it's also anti-human. That is, when I give myself over to that impulse and allow, it's not bad to be angry. I think be angry, be pissed off, it's a righteous indignation, exactly. However, when we cross the line from anger to then to dehumanize or to attack the dignity of another human being, even if they are liars, cheats, and scoundrels,
That
then
keeps us in the gutter.
keeps us in a loop.
sewer.
Yeah.
And our degradation of that person's dignity becomes a slow degradation of our dignity. And somebody's got to put a stop to it. And that's, in the legal profession, we call that the principle of civility,
Right. Now you're kind of getting into like philosophical things, right? Or can you justify a murder if it's going to save 100 murder, right? Like you're starting to get into this, like, do we rise above it or is it justified? So that's,
Well, I think
question.
the ultimate question that I'm wrestling with in my own career right now is exactly what you're saying. I don't like what being a lawyer makes me.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
And I don't know if it's the bigger issue is rising above the feeling and learning how to adapt, or leaving an environment that makes me a person that I don't want to be.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to something I touched on a little bit earlier, but I think we should talk a little bit more about now, and that is having a clear sense of who you are and why, and your why. Because if you're anchored in who you are, that is, this is who Ash Blackburn is. These are the values and principles and the rule of life that governs her. Then, and you know the why behind those things. It's not just some law that you've placed on yourself so that you become like a robot, right? But you understand the why, the passion behind it. Then, whatever the forces, and I'll just call them forces of evil to simplify the conversation. Not that I think that these people are evil, but just because it's anything that opposes you being authentic to who you are, anything that opposes your why becomes kind of a force of evil, right? And so being able to stand firm in the who you are and the why you are and the where you are, so that the profession doesn't change you, but you begin to form and change the profession. Now, let me say this: it's kind of a push and pull here, because yes, the legal profession forms and shapes us. Anything we do as work becomes a part of our formation as human beings. But we get to participate in that formation, and we get to participate in that much like a sculptor does with clay, right? We have a lump of clay. Sometimes you have a really hard, unyielding lump of clay. And I don't know if you've ever worked with those things where you have the clay in the middle and you're trying to make it do what you want it to do.
And then it gets all crazy.
Yeah,
Wonky.
it does not want to yield. It does not want to yield, but you keep at it. You keep pushing. You have a vision in your head of what you want that vase to look like, or that you want that sculpture to look like. And you just keep working at it and shaping it. And then sometimes it breaks and falls apart and you got to start all over. But you just keep coming back to it, knowing that fighting for who you are, fighting for what you believe and why you believe it, it's worth that alone. It's love for God, love for one another, love for yourself without apology, and that kind of love is worth the fight, I think. And then it allows us to then not let the forces of evil, if you will, form and change us and make us miserable. It allows us to impose upon a system and upon a people, a different way of looking at things, a different way of being, and one that's uniquely marked by your contribution or my contribution. Each of us are different human beings, and if we were to stand firm in the who we are and the why we are, as we're participating in the legal profession together, the legal profession would start to take on a character that would look more like kind of the best parts of who we are. And then those weak parts of us, I think we would help refine and smooth out. So those parts of my character were, when I get angry, I scream at somebody, those become tempered because I've got other people who are staying true to who they are and why they are, gently reminding us, hey, is that really you? Did you, it's okay to be angry, and you have a right to be angry, but you've crossed a line there. Or the way Jason Mills, I'll write a brief, and sometimes I'll be super angry.
Jason Mills is
Jason, my partner. Yeah, and Jason Mills and I handle amongst our different. I'm the head of our personal injury department, and he's the head of strategic development, and then cases across the firm, whether they're workers' comp or personal injury, will work on those cases that have an impact on the law or what have you. And so we're working on briefing together and working against counsel that, do things that frustrate us, like cite to documents that have specifically been excluded from the record and things like that just frustrate us, And then I will take, like, my first draft of any brief, and he'll testify to this, is usually super strident, rude, obnoxious, I use big words to be mean, and it kind of feels cathartic in the moment when you're writing those things.
For sure.
But then you go back and you look at it and you say,
I wasn't very mature.
No, acting like a fifth grader there, And
I gotta jump in. So I think what you're selling, the book that you've written, which is with a publisher, and hopefully that gets published soon. I think it's more profound than maybe you even appreciate, because Ash and I wrestle with this all the time. I wrestled with it a year or two ago before I became partners with Ash, and it was my life coach that, as I'm just saying, well, I just got to leave this whole thing and just, start doing real estate investments and just leave the profession, because I'm sick of the conflict, and the old partnership was just a lot of, that was not my values, right?
Yeah.
And she kind of helped me just take a step back and said, well, why can't you still, go down this path of wanting to serve more and be a better human, and use your firm and the people that work with you, lead them, right? And that could be your flock, right? Your congregation of sorts. And it wasn't too long after that where when Ash and I partnered up, I started writing a Monday's team theme as a way to just kind of inject what Ash and I want this new firm to be, which is self-improvement and talking about things and being vulnerable. And, last week I wrote a letter about how my dad was a jerk when I was at my brother's wedding, and how I realized that, like, I could take it personal, or I could just meet him where he was and try to approach him with love, and it changed my whole relationship with him. So all that to say that her point was, you can stay in it. You can still be the tough CEO, business person. You can still make money and climb the ladder. But it's the whole idea that we want our kids to be the president, but we don't want them to be politicians, right? Yeah. We don't. But you have to be a politician first before you become president. And we don't. What we need to solve the politician problem or the bad lawyer problem is better lawyers and better politicians. Not for all the good people to go, well, I'm just going to be a life coach now and I'm out of the game.
Yeah.
Right? So I think it's really profound, and I'm excited to read it, and I hope that it catches fire, and it's, again, not just for lawyers, but, like, I'd love to see all professionals go, okay, I don't have to leave this conflict-ridden career. I can actually do this and lead with my faith and my heart. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think you two are embodiments of what that means as well. You don't give yourselves enough credit, but I think that, like, before joining my current firm, partnering with Jason Mills and Toby Urick and Lisa Anderson and all that, I had a lot of experience in litigation and civil law, but not as much experience in personal injury. I hadn't run a personal injury practice. I had a few personal injury cases, but you and I both know, like, having a few personal injury cases is a lot different than having a personal injury law practice. And a big part of my learning was the generosity. You could have treated me like a competitor. You could have treated me as an adversary, somebody that is in a space, and treated it from a scarcity mindset, and said, if I help Jason succeed, then that will compromise my own success. But you didn't take that approach. You said, I'm going to be a friend of his. We're going to work together. I think you all saw a benefit in working with me. I saw a benefit in working with you. But beyond that, I think, and I've seen this in you. You saw the humanity in me, and the.
It's pretty easy to see.
Yeah,
It'd take a lot of skill.
And the value of just kind of engaging in a relationship where we could do something that's counterintuitive. Like, how many plaintiffs' firms do that for one another in that regard. And so I think it's important. I think I do think when people come to the crossroads that you talked about, Joe, and what you alluded to, Ash, in terms of like, do I really want to do this? I think that's a fair question, a question you should always ask. And there are different points in your career where you'll come to a crossroads. I know before I came to GGRM law firm, I had come to a crossroads. I'd been practicing for 20 years and wasn't sure, like, do I continue? Like my tenure at my prior firm had come to a conclusion. It wasn't a very tidy conclusion. It was really frustrating the way that things ended. And I was kind of at a loss, like, where do I go? Do I go left? Do I go right? How do I handle this? Do I even want to be an attorney? Do I want to do something else? And, I think you have to continually ask that question and be willing to say, I'm done. This was good for a season. Now I'm going to go do something else. And so it's okay to come to the answer to the question, should I continue being an attorney, or should I continue fill in the blank for whoever's listening to this, right? And say, you know what, I think I'm done with this period of my life. I want to do something else because, like, to your point, I don't like what this job is making me be. I don't like the way this job is making me feel. I think I've given the best version of myself to this work, and it's not moving the needle.
Yeah.
It's not fulfilling me. And maybe when I got into the profession, with certain expectations and values, but now those values and expectations aren't the same. And so maybe I need to align what I do for work with my current values and expectations, because I really don't want to put the work into.
Do you think most people, when they feel stuck, when they feel uninspired, it's because they convince themselves and just talk themselves into staying in something that no longer serves them and doesn't allow them to serve? I feel like that's where a lot of people get stuck. And
I do. I think, people get stuck. They become burned out. I mean, I think it's natural for us as people to be in a space doing a thing for a particular amount of time, whatever that thing is. Like, for example, since becoming a lawyer, I've given just north of 18,000 hours of pro bono legal service.
18,000?
Yeah, so I would.
Wow.
What Kim and I did.
1,800.
No, when Kim and I started our firm, we said this. We said, because we had one of those crisis moments. I was working for a big firm, Littler Mendelsohn. She was working for the state. Our careers are going in these directions. They're popping great. We were successful by all metrics on the outside.
Yeah, Littler, that's a big employment national firm.
Yeah, big
name recognition.
Yeah, and it was a great firm. Great as far as big firms go. It was an awesome big firm to be with. All kinds of training opportunities, mentoring opportunities, big cases that make a big difference. All that stuff. Wonderful. We had these two wonderful kids too. Robbie, Adeline. And so it's literally like professional tag team wrestling, where I'm passing the kids off to her, she's passing the kids off to me.
Tag in.
And as we're entering into that, the first couple of years, we lost sight of the God we love. We lost sight of why we love one another and what we're doing, and we lost sight of our family. At least I did. I don't know that Kim felt that as much as I did, but I felt that intensely. And I literally, for a period of time, had one foot out of my marriage, one foot in, and I wasn't sure, I wanted to be a lawyer. There's a lot of questions I was dealing with. So we started our firm. We came to a crossroads, and it was either we get divorced and go on the tracks we're going.
Oh, that's serious.
Or, yeah.
So, it was
dark. It's either, we're going to break up this marriage and everything that it represents and go different directions, or we're going to quit our jobs and start our own thing, And so we chose the latter. Quit our jobs, got our relationship with God right, and got our relationship with one another right, made those things the priority, those realities our priority. Then from that, we were able to love our kids well, love each other well, and then build a law practice that made sense for us. And what that meant was us looking and say, why did we become lawyers in the first place? And, for both of us, we want to make a difference. We want to serve people well. I wanted to be a pastor and still did, but I wanted to, but how do I take this pastoral heart and apply it to the law practice? And for me at that time, the answer was, well, I need to have an outlet outside of the clients that pay the bills to serve. And so we let churches, ministries, nonprofits of every shape, size, form, we let everybody know. We said, listen, we are here to serve you for free. And if you come, and we joke with folks, we'd say, if you come and see us before there's a problem, we won't charge you anything. If you come and see us after there's a problem, we will charge you double. So come see us. And so we built and so what that did is it opened the door for friendships and relationships with people doing all kinds of amazing things. From sex trafficking to homelessness to child abuse and neglect, every kind of thing, and dealing with churches of every denomination, dealing with, how do I do my corporate paperwork? How do I deal with this crisis? The pastor has had this horrible thing happen, or, somebody's stolen from us, all these different things that we got to lean into and come alongside of folks and serve them to the best of our ability. So over the years, we've done that. That's just been a part of our thing. A third of our legal practice has been given to serving others. And I've just worked it in. But in order to do that, if you're in a billable hour model, you have to bill your hours and then add a third on top of that. So, you know what I mean? So at a place like Hutch, for example, I would do my work for my clients and make sure I was not only covering myself, but covering the firm we were trying to grow. So that would get us to 1,900, 2,100 hours. And then I would throw on another 600, 700, 800 hours on that. And then you do that for a while, and you do it because you love it. For me, it wasn't a drain. I love serving people. And I love all the opportunities it gives me to enter into people's lives, to have relationship with people, to see change occur, all that. I love it. But it came, as I transitioned into personal injury work and realized that the work we get to do from dawn to dusk is just that kind of pastoral work, loving and caring for people well, being their advocate and doing that. And I was still having this other area of kind of public service. I realized, geez, I'm kind of tired, Well,
but you have kids too, right?
Yeah,
you don't want to not be there in their lives.
Yeah, and you have to have margin, and that's the one thing that I sacrificed over the years that most people build in, most wise people build in, is margin. Where's the margin in life just to be Jason? Because where's the margin in life to connect with my wife? Where's the margin in life if my son needs me? Can I just drop everything and go up and see him? If my daughter needs me in the evening because she's dealing with something because she's in college, can I drop everything and pick up the phone in the middle of the day and not feel guilty about it, And if the answer is no, then I don't have enough margin. So how do I create that circumstance? So long story short, last December, I sent out a note to all of the different organizations, people, individuals, and said, hey, listen, I'm going to take a 2-year break from all this. And not because I don't love doing it. I do. I love serving, but because I need
margin.
I need that there's a pruning that's happening, and I don't think I can be as fruitful and be all that God has called me to be if I am just spread out and poured out.
You have a beautiful way of describing, you said pruning. Explain to our listeners how they can maybe massage themselves of the guilt they might feel of I
have to be all these things to all these people.
Right. And I'm at the, I'm at the pinnacle of my career and things are going amazing. I can't stop now. That'll come later. How do you explain this idea of pruning?
Yeah. When you think about it from an agricultural standpoint, think about a person who's growing wine grapes, for example. I've gone to several vineyards and tasted lots of good wine, and the scriptures call out this metaphor of abiding in the vine, and what does that mean to abide in the vine? And so, for those outside of the faith, the way I would describe it is, I don't think what we're after is work-life balance, because work-life balance is about putting work against life, and they're constantly in conflict, and you're always working to get to life. And we have to understand that life and work should complement each other. So I like to talk about things in terms of a fully integrated life. And when we have a fully integrated life, now work and the rest of life complement and complete each other and become full expressions of who we are, so that what we do in one space complements what we do in another space. Much like when you're looking at a healthy vine and how it's growing, that those things, the combination of the root system, the trunk system, and then the branches all work together to produce fruit. And so, but if you are a plant that is flourishing and you find yourself kind of growing in this direction, growing in that direction, and feeling the exhilaration of being fruitful in these different areas, but never taking any time to ask yourself, despite the fact that I see fruit growing here, is the plant in all of the integration, is it truly healthy? And that's the question I had to ask myself. Am I really healthy? Body, mind, soul, spirit. And the answer to that question was, no, I really am not. And I could point to 10 areas in my life where I really wasn't healthy. I was being all the things that people could see and all the areas where I needed to show up, I was showing up. But was I really healthy, and could that be sustained going forward in my current context? And so I think for those listening, I think asking that hard question, even though things are going right for me and I'm in the middle of my career and I'm making sacrifices now, hopefully it'll pay dividends later on, I would just caution on that to consider whether the decisions that are being made are truly healthy from a holistic standpoint, and whether your life is truly integrated. That is, your professional life, your spiritual being, your family life, are all those things working together to be a complete expression of who you are and why you're on this planet? Or are you making sacrifices of one aspect of who you are for the sake of another,
That's such a better way than the whole work-life balance, which we need to get away from. I think you're right.
Well, I guess my question goes back to what you said in the beginning, that you were frustrated because you didn't understand the direction that God was taking you. What does that mean? What did it feel like to know that God was pushing you in one direction when you wanted to go in a different? Because I feel like I reached out to you a couple weeks ago and I said, help with my spiritual path.
What did you say? Yeah, why did you think to reach out to Jason?
Lawyering and faith. I saw it on Facebook in one of your beautiful posts that I read all the time. And I feel the conflict of not liking what lawyering makes me.
Yeah.
I think when we started Blackburn Wirth and I became your partner, I also got exposed to things that I didn't know that I really loved. I'm good at being a lawyer, no doubt about it, right? I like being a lawyer. There are cases that I truly enjoy. Mostly, though, I hate the conflict every day.
Yeah.
I hate it with the clients when I can't give them what they want because there are barriers to it, and ChatGPT has told them otherwise. the judges who, I'm trying to go through the right avenues of, okay, this attorney has done these things that don't violate the rules and they're not held accountable. Yeah. That does not sit with my righteous nature. Yeah. And so for me, I'm trying to listen to the direction that God wants me to go to. And in starting this new firm, I love managing people and I love training. And that was why it was really easy for me to sit down with you and be like, oh yeah, let me nerd out about what PI is. And you ask questions and you're inquisitive. I love the structure of how the business works. Yeah. I love being a podcaster with Joe. And the more that I find that I love these things, the more taxing being a lawyer feels.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But there are so many people that rely on me now being a lawyer, be it my family, be it our coworkers, be it Joe. I've built this thing that relies on me. So what direction does God want me to go?
Yeah, no, that is so, when you face that, when you come face to face with a living God, of course, there's joy in that, and purpose. There's purpose in knowing that you're loved by the God who created the entire universe, and that He loves you so much that He's numbered even every hair on your head. Mm-hmm. So that's wonderful, and then He also, there's a scripture that says that He knows all your tears and saves them all in a little vial, Mm-hmm. And so just that poetry and that understanding of this living, active God who's there. But he's on the flip side, it's also painful to be in the hands of a living God as he's forming and making us, because
Say more.
I think we have an agenda, and we have things that we like and we want.
Like not suffering.
Yeah, like not suffering, avoiding suffering.
I'm wrestling with that. Like, I know how to have an easy, great life, and just leave me alone.
Yes. But when you come to the crossroads where you're like, where you're wrestling, you want an answer to a question that God is not readily willing to answer, for a variety of reasons. And for me, it was at that juncture, it was about my maturity, being able to understand that at the point in time that I was asking to enter into a particular expression of his heart, that is pastoral ministry, that I wasn't in a place where, I wouldn't have said this at the time, but knowing, looking back, I wasn't in a place where that would have been healthy for me or anybody I would serve. It would make me a tyrant almost, And so anyway, fighting with him, and really honestly fighting with him. And if you read the book of Psalms, for example, you've got this character, David, who is in constant warfare with God. We read the book of Psalms and we always kind of pick out the nice ones, that make us feel good. But if you really dig into it, you've got this human being mad at God and making his anger known, but always coming back to, I trust you, I love you, I surrender my life to you.
But you drive me crazy.
Yeah, but you drive me crazy. And it's this constant push-pull, but being willing to have such a radical relationship with God on these big issues that you're even willing to have your heart broken. I'll tell a little story on that, the risking a broken heart. A couple years ago, I was in a campaign against Dennis Hoff, who was the owner of the Bunny Ranch and
It's a brothel.
The brothel, yeah. These are legal brothels in Lyon County and Nye County. And then, excuse me, sorry. Sorry,
We're not cutting that out.
Love it.
The fact that Pastor Guinasso just had rap music come up. That's your wife calling you?
No, that's I've got to take some medicine in a little while. That's just what it's
With beer.
That's staying in.
Yeah, it would be hip hop for sure. So
We didn't get into your checkered past, but
Yeah.
Not watching. His face has changed colors.
yeah, I love hip hop actually. So that's good for you all to know. But so here I am in the midst of this campaign with this notorious brothel owner. He had a show called I forget what the name of his show was, but he had an HBO show and very
Chicken Ranch.
He was like a mini Trump, and he framed himself like that, as a mini Donald Trump with all the bravado and hubris, and he ran for assembly and actually was elected as an assembly person. He'd won his primary. And I was in a battle with him.
You're kidding.
No.
I didn't even know this. Are you kidding?
No. He ran out here in Nye County, and the Nye County is heavily Republican, and he ran against the incumbent at the time, and he beat the incumbent handily, and as a result, in that particular district, a Democratic opponent wouldn't have any hope of beating him. So when the primaries are done, he's pretty much the assemblyman elect, and that's the way he's treating his position. And meanwhile, he's also fighting me and my colleagues in Lyon County, where we're working to repeal the ordinances that allow for prostitution to be legal in that county. And so I provided legal support and some of the campaign support, and I became kind of unwittingly, I became the face of the campaign. Me and Melissa Holland, who runs a nonprofit up there called Awaken, some other folks. And so we're all engaged in this battle. Jill Tolles, who is an assemblywoman, she was dealing with him as well. And we are getting our butts kicked in this campaign. It's not going well for us because we're being outspent. First and foremost, like 60 to 1. I mean, for every dollar we have, they've got 60 to spend on the campaign. And money in politics is like volume for messaging. And so we have So the only way I could generate volume was through like an earned media, so making sure we were getting in front of the media, and even doing that, Dennis Hoff and his operation were far better, like social media and all the things. They just were better at it than us on every level. And so our message wasn't getting out. The polling was not looking good for us. And I was upset. And so I went out for a walk with the Lord, which I do in the mornings. I went out just before dawn, and I'm walking. I'm really angry at him. I'm letting
walking prayer, walking meditation. Are you saying anything in your mind, or are you just listening?
I went out to walk to just complain to him. Basically, I was just
You're David. You're shaking your fist.
I was just really upset, and I'm like, we're losing this. What's going on? And just upset. And then that, so, and I'm walking with purpose. I'm not like taking a leisurely stroll with him. Like sometimes when more often than not, when I walk with him, I'm prayerful, I'm meditating, I'm observing the sunrise, I'm looking at animals and flowers and all those things, and having a different kind of communion that like results in natural worship. But sometimes I'm dealing with really hard issues, and this one was particularly hard for me because not only are we getting beat up really bad, but I'm getting maligned. Like online, they're creating caricatures of me, and I'm just feeling personally attacked.
The first time I heard your name, I Googled you, and it's just article after article, and it's Jason is this, and he's that, and right?
Yeah.
And just some really horrible things where I'm like, okay, this is going to be interesting to meet this guy. But if you believed everything you read online, you'd kind of be like, okay, this guy's extreme.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was, yeah. So that was the kind of thing that was happening, and it was crushing. It was soul crushing, And so I'm walking with him, and I finally shut up and just, we're mulling things over and letting things kind of settle. And then I hear a voice. I didn't hear, not like.
Not your own voice.
Not my own voice.
In your heart, you pointed at your heart.
Yeah. So hear this voice. And he said, Jason, why didn't you ask me for victory? That was an odd question because we're like in October, and I'm thinking, well, Lord, I'm doing my part. I'm being faithful to do all the things you've called me to do. I've organized the people. I've, I've made sure we have a campaign. I've done my best to raise money. I'm doing all that I can do to advocate in this space, and I'm just trusting you with the result. I trust you that if you want us to win, that we'll win, right? And I feel like that's a kind of an A+ theological answer. As I was giving him that answer, I was kind of patting myself on the back, and letting him know that I know that he's in control of all things, and that I'm willing to surrender to that. And so I continued walking, being, kind of self-congratulatory in that answer. And then he asked me the same question again. Jason, why don't you ask me for victory? Like, okay. So I thought he didn't hear my first answer very well, so I kind of repackaged the answer like a good lawyer does and said, well, Lord, you are God of all things, and I know that I can trust you. And if we're faithful with what we're supposed to do, then I know that the fruits of that faithfulness will be victory. Again, I was pretty proud of the answers that I was giving because, again, from a theological standpoint, the surrender to God's sovereignty and his will, being faithful in the little will result in great blessing, all these things that when you come to a crossroads with him and you're upset. Then he asked me the same question a third time. And when God asks you a question 3 times, it's usually he's after something more than a great theological answer. And he said, Jason, why haven't you asked me for victory? And I could barely get the words out. I said, Lord, if I ask you for victory and we lose, my heart will be broken. I don't want to have a broken heart. And he says back to me, he says, Jason, would you trust me with your broken heart? I just wept. I didn't know what to do with that. I was like, yes, Lord, of course, I will trust you with my broken heart. But the prerequisite to that conversation was being willing, to ask God for something affirmative, whether it's victory in this campaign or direction in life, relative to our profession, how to handle my spouse and my relationship with her. All these big decisions in life come down to, are you willing to risk having a broken heart in your faith? Because sometimes we do this to ourselves, particularly in evangelical circles. We sell a God that kind of is about health, wealth, prosperity, and we don't really portray the authenticity that comes from a day-to-day walk with God, where at some point God is going to break our heart. And are we willing to trust him with that broken heart, knowing that he is the God of broken hearts that can mend those hearts and make them into something whole and beautiful? And so after that prayer was prayed and after that conversation was had, 7 days later to the day, Dennis Toft dropped dead on his bed.
Oh, jeez.
on his birthday.
That was a twist. That was a trap.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was a twist.
And when I got the phone call, I remembered that conversation. And not that I didn't pray for the guy to die, honestly.
Hope not.
But the what it did is it sobered me. And there's a scripture that says it's both a fearful and awful thing to fall in the hands of a living God. Mm-hmm. But David's answer to that, when he was facing a living God and the struggle and the fallenness of his situation, his answer to God's question to him is, well, I will follow you, or I'd rather be in your hands. Because there's a part in scripture where he's committed this horrible sin, and God says, okay, here are the consequences. You get to choose which one it is. And he chooses the consequence that puts him right in the hands of God and allows him to know that even in his brokenness, God has him, And so if we can approach, and again, it just kind of goes back to the earlier theme. For those who don't share my faith, I think what I'm really talking about is this humility that comes with being a human being. And are we willing to have our hearts broken for the things that we love? Are we willing to have our hearts broken in pursuit of what it means to be fully human and what it means to flourish as a human being? And if the answer is no, then a lot of the things that we do to settle and to go along to get along, or to go through the motions, even if going through the motions is doing great things like opposing, something that you think is, awful. Like for me, it was the legalized prostitution business in Lyon County. If you're not willing to risk a broken heart in it, then you probably shouldn't be in this space. And so if in the practice of law, as you seek to be a leader, Ash, you're a natural leader. People want to follow you. People want to please you and want to accomplish goals with you, right? And so I think as you've become the partner in your firm that manages people and processes, I think the things that you love, the mentoring, the systems, the organization, the promoting the firm and all that you do, there's a space for you there, if it's something that you love and that you're willing to have your heart broken for again and again. If going to battle in court over and over again and doing those things isn't worth the price that's being asked of you, then that's okay too. You can say, you know what, I've done that and that's not for me, but I can still be a lawyer and still lead lawyers and still invest in lawyers. So maybe your role is to mentor other lawyers who are passionate about going to trial and fighting these battles and doing all these things. And you can help them do it in a way that's excellent, that's God-honoring, and that's honoring to the profession, and that is and that bears fruit in their lives both personally and professionally. Because I think you'll care about the whole person, not just the result. And so, because you have a kind of a pastoral sense to you, like when the things you talk about, the things that you like to do, it just, and you too, Joe, the way you talk about what you really brings you to life, it's this this heart that's kind of kindred to mine, where you just want to love and care for people well, and you want to be able to lead well, and leading for me, and I think for you is about service first, and necessarily the accolades or all the things that come because you're out front leading, but it's all those quiet moments. I remember there's a person in my department who we promoted, and she had been with the firm for a long time and been passed over several times, but this became her time, and I wasn't really sure what to expect, but she just blossomed into this force of nature, when she got the opportunity. And for me to be a part of her story in that small way, and we went to dinner to celebrate her accomplishment, because she, at GGRM, they make you go through like 3 levels of interviews and all these different things, and she passed every test. She gave the best interviews I've seen my whole professional career that were moved. I was brought to tears in one of those situations, but we go out and I've got this picture of her on my phone, and she just, the smile on her face and as she accomplished that thing, she's an immigrant from El Salvador, I believe. But anyway, that smile on her face, that will stick with you. Now, it's not, will it make my book? Will it make, will it be something that, will be written on my gravestone? Will it be anything that anybody will notice? No. But it's a treasure that I treasure a lot.
Ever.
And I have a whole chest of these treasures and
these moments
in the human interaction of the people we get to share life with that nobody gets to see, but you just kind of put them there.
Yeah. I've got a thing on my mirror that says, we don't remember days, we remember moments, right?
Yes.
So you're collecting those moments, and I'm sure they buoy you up, right?
Yes.
Jason Guinasso, you started off by saying that you intended to be a pastor, right? That was a beautiful sermon you just gave us right there.
Yes, it was.
I think
I was in it.
I think you just preached, because I want to, kind of stand up and start clapping and, let out a little hallelujah. Yeah, and I like that you came back to the fact that, look, you don't have to be someone that believes in the God that you believe in, or the, Christ, or, an evangelical kind of base, it can be a higher power, right? It doesn't have to be necessarily the way you view God, correct?
Oh, I think people come into relationship with God through different pathways. I think there's one God, and I think there's one Christ for sure. But I think how people get to him, varies. I came from an unconventional place. You wouldn't think that I would come into a relationship with God from where I came from. And there's a lot of folks out there all over the world, who are aching, for a God-sized hole to be filled. And there's only one God that can fill that, right?
Well, yeah, and I guess we didn't, I wish we weren't running out of time, but give people the condensed version of just the stark contrast. There was one point, was it in high school, where you brought a sawed-off shotgun to school, and were you arrested?
I was. So, as a teenager, I was on the street. I had left home for a variety of reasons.
But you were homeless.
But I was homeless, and I was with a gang, and that kind of became my family, these young, angry men who were just trying to survive, and were also trying to find an outlet for their anger and their displacement, and so, I was in between that world and still trying to finish high school, and I just gave up. I said, I'm going to drop out, but that didn't stop people from wanting to challenge. And because I wasn't at that time, I weighed $105 and wet, and it wasn't very intimidating, but I had a reputation as.
Well, you had a mullet. That's intimidating.
I had a mullet.
You had a mullet.
Having a nice mullet.
Cheese.
Yes, yeah.
Aggie Z Cavalry.
All that. That'll change.
Listen to your hip hop music.
Yes, yeah. I felt a lot tougher than I probably was, and I had this reputation. And so people would want to challenge that because I didn't look like my reputation,
Right.
I didn't. So I get these challenges. So there were a bunch of football players who had done harm to one of my homies at the time, and put him in the hospital, and said they were going to do the same thing to me if I showed up at this thing. I said, well, you're not going to do the same thing to me. I'll make sure of that. And so I strapped myself with.
Say hello to my little friend.
Yes. And I was ready to go, but I had a friend. God bless him. He's passed away now. But he ratted me out because he knew I had the gun. He knew where I was. He was with me kind of, in that space, but he was with me to make sure I didn't do anything stupid. And, I was intent to make sure people remembered me in that situation. But what happened is the police got called and they cordoned off the area. They came to my car. They found my gun. I was taken away. And the system that brought me in, there's a person by the name of Otto Kelly, who is a gang law enforcement guy, and a counselor, another counselor named Larry Liparelli, I think, and then Judge Jordan and Judge McGee. And they were looking for ways to take kids like me and find a different way than institutionalize, because they thought, institutionalization cannot be the answer for these young people and what they're dealing with. And particularly for me, they saw something in me that I didn't see for sure, but they wanted to give me a chance outside of the system. And so at the time there was two people, Ben and Anita Sanchez, who just simple people. I mean, really, Ben worked in a sawmill. Anita was a stay-at-home mother, and they just wanted to love kids, so they moved from Loyalton to Reno to do that. They had this home that was called the Lighthouse, and there were other at-risk kids in this place, and I was placed there with them. And so that whole traumatic event put me into a home with a family that chose to love me. And, there are a lot of there are books of apologetics about why, the Christian faith is the true faith, and all the things that, if we wanted to have a long theological debate, we could kind of draw from. But for me, when I encountered the love of God expressed through those two, it was as if I saw the resurrected life of Jesus Christ in our day and age, working through the lives of these people, not on just one day, but every day. Not on.
You already had it. Sorry, but had you already had an introduction to Christ and a relationship with Christ before this family? Because Ash and I were talking, and I thought it was a good question for her to ask you. Like, what were you going to ask him about? Just had that family?
Do you think that if that family hadn't been religious, that your life's work would look like it does right now?
But they were still the same people
still
that
loving,
love everything, but
still...
they didn't come about it from a Christ God perspective.
Yeah, I think it may have looked a little bit more transactional, and that's not to take away from people who love others
outside of that,
but it's just to say that Ben and Anita were able to love me and care for me for every day in and day out, for a season in their life, and what they imparted to me was that same resurrected life of Christ that was in them was what got imparted to me. And it was the transformative force that worked both within and without to take what I was and make me into what the scriptures might call a new man, like a new person.
Right. Yeah. But I want to just, are you able to go through the mental exercise of suspending what you know and saying, I could see that I could still have this life where I serve and love? Or is it like it can only come through this belief in Jesus Christ and his resurrection?
Yeah, it would be, if I didn't have my own relationship with Christ, I don't think that I could flourish in the way that I have. Doesn't mean I wouldn't be able to survive or muddle along, but I don't think that I would be able to experience or been able to experience the flourishing that came after that, because that transaction that takes place, from faith, that is the presentation of the gospel and the entering into that life of faith, whatever that is, it's this transformative force that takes this person and changes them into this person, and then becomes the constant reality for that person, at least for me, throughout the rest of my life. And so without that person walking alongside of me, and it's kind of inherent in the definition of faith from the Christian perspective, because there's a book in the New Testament called the Book of Hebrews, and in chapter 11, verse 1, it defines faith like this. It says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And there's a lot of preachers who preach on that scripture. But that word substance, hypostasis, I think is the Greek word. It's found only one other place in the scripture. It's in the first chapter of Hebrews, verse 3. And that term is translated in that other verse as person, not substance. And so if you transliterate that view of what that word means into the book of Hebrews, then it transforms how we look at faith. And it says this, it says, now faith is the person we hope for and in, and the evidence of that person working in and through our lives. And then the rest of the chapter walks through the lives of real human beings encountering real challenges and having the person of God operating in and through their lives to bring transformation to them, transformation to their family, transformation to their community, even as it gets to the end of that chapter where people are being martyred and killed, and they're not seeing the completion or the promise of faith be fulfilled, but yet they're still dying with the reality of the person that's operating in their faith with them. And so for me, I think a lot of good could be done by just loving people really well. And if that's all we did, the world would certainly be a better place. But if we really want to see transformation, I think humanity has to come face to face with the living God and enter into relationship with him. And wherever you come from that, like I come into my relationship from an kind of an evangelical paradigm. And I realize that might be different than, where you come from that, Joe, or you, Ash. But I think at one point or another, because I think we're created that way. I think as human beings, I think we're flesh and blood, but we're also spiritual creatures, and there's a place. If you think of our bodies as temples, like that metaphor of being a temple, and in a temple there's a place called the most holy place, and the most holy place is like
Holy of Holies.
The Holy of Holies. Only one priest can go in there one time a year, and they've got to do a lot of things to do that. Well, think of our bodies that way, and think of this one most holy place in our temple that can only be occupied by the living God. And until that place is filled in our heart and our soul and our spirit, then we're not complete. And so I would just encourage folks to consider that, consider that God-shaped hole in our heart and understand that until that's filled, you're never really full and complete. And what you have to offer, even though it's good and right and may even be beautiful, may feel empty because it's not connected with the other part of what makes us human. And so don't run from that. Like I think people run from spirituality and run from God because they see a lot of rules and laws and anger and hypocrisy and all that's real. I'm not going to dispute that that's not there, but I think it's not an excuse for us. Then my son is really good at this. He raises all kinds of questions about God and whether I should do this or do that. But I asked him, I said, beyond the questions, do you have the courage to seek out the answer? It's because we can come up with a lot of questions about who God is and who we are, but are willing to kind of chase down the answer. And I think people that hunger and thirst, and I think there are a lot of people in our culture right now that are hunger and thirsting to fill that place in their soul that's only reserved for a living God. I think if they pursue that hunger and thirst like they do other pursuits, that they will be filled, and there'll be a real transformation, like there was for me, and like there is for thousands and hundreds of thousands of people, not only in our day and age, but going back millennia. So,
well, I think that's a beautiful prayer to leave on. Jason Guinasso, author of Lawyering by Faith. It's with a publisher, and I really do hope that it catches fire and that it allows people to, realize that, okay, I don't have to continue to wrestle with this. Maybe I don't have to light a match and burn my whole career down and become a monk. That I can, I can find some way to have them integrate and coexist and begin to change the world. And I wish that we didn't run out of time, because Ash and I could talk to you forever. But she does get to ask you the final question.
And I feel like I know what the answer is going to be, but we're attorneys on accident because we feel like we became attorneys a little bit on accident. Now podcasters. Do you feel like you're where you are in life on accident?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. An accident of grace, I would say. Yeah, definitely. I didn't plan this journey the way it came out. If I had control of all things, my life would have looked a lot different, I think. But the accident of being loved by a family like Ben and Anita's family, the accident of meeting Kim when I met her and being brought into her family, the accident of being encouraged, to get an education. When I was going to be a UPS driver. I didn't even get to tell you the story about, just briefly, just so you know what an accident this is. I had worked 7 years at UPS, worked my way through college to keep my promise to Kim, who had said, yes, I'll marry you, but you got to go to school. And I'm ready to put on the brown uniform and go and drive this truck. And my first day out, I've got the browns on, and I'm thinking I am calendar material in these nice brown uniform. I get in the truck. It's all loaded up. My supervisor gets in. He's ready to go. He's lighting up a cigarette. I start up the engine. I feel the weight of the truck, and I'm exhilarated. And then I start to drive, and there's a stop sign right in the middle of the place, where you're supposed to stop before then you go out to the road. And I hit the brake, and I didn't realize on these trucks the brakes were so touchy. So when I hit the brake, you can imagine the whole truck goes like this, and there's this big jolt. My supervisor hadn't put his seatbelt on, so his face goes planted into the windshield with the cigarette there.
Wait. How far into your career are you?
Yeah, I'm literally I'd been 7 years working in the preload hub, hucking boxes. Finally, through seniority, you get to have this union job that pays well. This is my first day as a driver, and his face is planted into the windshield, and his hand goes where the door. You know how they have those sliding doors in the UPS truck?
Oh, no.
The UPS truck.
Oh,
no. The thing hits his hand, breaks it in 7 places. He leans back. Blood is squirting out like this. Literally, he's got a cigarette in his mouth, and it's just kind of hanging there. And he takes a big drag. So he looks at me. He says, "Take me to the hospital." And no joke, my first delivery as a UPS driver was to take my supervisor to the hospital. And I knew then my destiny was not to be a UPS driver.
What can Brown do for you? Can take you to the hospital.
So yes, I'm an attorney by accident, or on accident.
Okay. Well,
What a story.
we knew the answer, but we still had to ask. Thank you for coming on.
Sure.
Thank you for the beautiful sermon and wisdom and wit.
I needed that more than you know.
We're gonna have you. Will you come back once you've got this book published? And let's have another conversation. But Jason Guinasso, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. You're beautiful people. I'm glad to be here. So
Thank
yeah,
Thanks.
Thanks.